Egyptian Revolution, 1919. The Egyptian Revolution of 1919 was a watershed moment in the nation's modern history. It was the first truly nationwide uprising against British colonial rule, involving Egyptians from diverse social, religious, and political backgrounds. Sparked by the British exile of nationalist leader Saad Zaghlul and other members of the Wafd Party, the revolution quickly evolved into a broad-based popular movement demanding independence and self-determination. Central to the revolutionary fervor were the widespread riots and civil disturbances that erupted across the country, demonstrating the depth of anti-colonial sentiment among ordinary Egyptians. Colonialism and political frustration. By 1914, Egypt had been declared a British protectorate, formally severing its nominal ties to the Ottoman Empire. Although Egypt had been under British control since 1882, this legal shift consolidated British dominance. During World War I, Egypt had provided men, resources, and labor to the British war effort, but without meaningful consultation or recognition. The wartime hardships, economic strain, inflation, and forced conscription into the labor corps fueled widespread discontent. In the aftermath of the war, Egyptian nationalists hoped that United States President Woodrow Wilson's principle of self-determination, as espoused in his 14 points, would be applied to Egypt. Leading this nationalist movement was Saad Zaghlul, a towering figure in Egyptian politics. Born in 1859 in the village of Ibiana in the Nile Delta, Zaghlul came from a modest background but rose to prominence through education and public service. He studied at Al-Azhar University and later at the School of Law in Cairo, where he was influenced by modern legal thought and nationalist ideas. Fluent in both traditional Islamic discourse and the language of constitutional reform, Zaghlul bridged Egypt's religious, liberal, and popular spheres. Throughout his career, Zaghlul held several high-ranking government positions under British rule, including Minister of Education and Minister of Justice. However, he remained critical of British domination and gradually emerged as the leading voice for independence. In 1918, he and a group of nationalist elites founded the Wafd Party, Wafd meaning delegation, with the goal of advocating for Egypt's independence at the Paris Peace Conference. Their intention was to present Egypt's case on the world stage, aligning with international currents of anti-colonialism. When the British authorities refused to allow the delegation to attend the conference and arrested Zaghlul and other Wafd leaders on March 8, 1919, it triggered mass outrage and widespread revolt. Zaghlul's moral authority and rhetorical power galvanized the population. In one of his most quoted declarations, he stated, "We demand complete independence, not a compromise, not a protectorate, not any form of foreign control." The arrest of such a widely respected leader transformed the nationalist cause into a truly popular movement, with students, peasants, workers, and women joining mass demonstrations that soon escalated into full-blown nationwide unrest. The riots, mass protests, and violent clashes. The reaction to the exile of Zaghlul was immediate and explosive. Riots, strikes, and demonstrations broke out across Egypt, beginning in Cairo and Alexandria, before rapidly spreading to rural areas and towns across the Nile Delta and Upper Egypt. The revolution was unique in its inclusivity. Students, workers, peasants, religious leaders, civil servants, and even women participated actively in the resistance. In Cairo, the revolution began with peaceful demonstrations organized by students, lawyers, and civil servants, many of whom carried banners demanding the release of Zaghlul and Egyptian independence. Within days, however, these protests escalated into direct confrontations with British troops and police forces. Demonstrators attacked trams, set fire to foreign businesses, and stormed government buildings. British forces responded with live ammunition and mounted patrols. The confrontation on March 15, 1919, in Cairo left dozens dead and hundreds injured. In Alexandria, demonstrations turned violent after British troops fired on a crowd gathered in Manshia Square. Mobs retaliated by attacking British-owned shops, torching military vehicles, and attempting to storm the British consulate. Clashes between protesters and soldiers raged for several days, turning parts of the city into battlegrounds. The city's extensive foreign population, including Greeks, Italians, and French, added to the complexity of the violence, as protesters often saw them as symbols of foreign domination. Rural areas also experienced significant upheaval. Villagers attacked railway stations and police posts, especially in provinces like Garbia, Minya, and Beni Suef. The violence sometimes took the form of anti-European riots, with properties of foreign residents being targeted. Peasant participation was particularly notable in areas where anger over forced wartime labor recruitment had already been simmering. The scope and scale of the riots placed immense pressure on the British administration. Estimates suggest that over 800 Egyptians were killed during the disturbances, though some sources place the number higher. The violence and its persistence made it clear to the British that military suppression alone could not resolve the crisis. Political outcomes and legacy. Faced with mounting unrest, international scrutiny, and the failure of military suppression to restore order, the British government realized it could no longer ignore Egyptian demands for autonomy. In an attempt to resolve the crisis diplomatically, the British sent a delegation known as the Milner Commission, headed by Lord Alfred Milner, to Egypt in December 1919. Its stated purpose was to assess the causes of the uprising and to recommend a future framework for Anglo-Egyptian relations. However, the commission was immediately met with popular hostility and a nationwide boycott. Egyptians, led by the Wafd Party, viewed the mission as a stalling tactic rather than a genuine path to independence. Under instruction from Saad Zaghlul and other nationalist leaders, Egyptians refused to cooperate with the commission. Public meetings were held in protest, stores closed, and even civil servants participated in the boycott. The unified resistance demonstrated that no solution could succeed without the participation of indigenous political leadership. Despite the initial deadlock, Lord Milner pursued private discussions with Egyptian leaders. In June 1920, he met with Saad Zaghlul in London, resulting in what came to be known as the Milner-Zaghlul Agreement. While not formalized in a treaty, these meetings laid the foundation for Britain's eventual recognition of Egypt's de facto independence. Milner reportedly remarked, "It is no longer possible to govern Egypt except through Egyptians." This statement, made after witnessing the depth of nationalist sentiment and organizational capacity in Egypt, marked a significant shift in British imperial attitudes. The eventual outcome was a unilateral declaration of Egyptian independence on February 28, 1922, ending the official British protectorate. However, the declaration reserved several areas: defense, foreign relations, the protection of foreign interests, and Sudan, for continued British control. While far from complete sovereignty, the move acknowledged the failure of colonial absolutism and the power of mass nationalist mobilization. Aftermath and impact. Though the unilateral Declaration of Independence in 1922 formally ended the British protectorate, it did not grant Egypt full sovereignty. Britain continued to maintain control over four reserve points: defense, foreign affairs, the protection of foreign interests and minorities, and the administration of the Sudan. These limitations deeply frustrated nationalists, who viewed the declaration as a partial and conditional independence that fell short of the aspirations voiced during the revolution. Nevertheless, the revolution had a profound and immediate impact on Egypt's political structure. In 1923, Egypt promulgated a liberal constitution that established a parliamentary monarchy. Saad Zaghlul returned as a national hero and led the Wafd Party to a sweeping electoral victory in 1924, forming the first popularly elected government in Egyptian history. However, this experiment in constitutional democracy was marred by British interference, internal divisions, and monarchical manipulation. When Sir Lee Stack, the British commander of the Egyptian army in Sudan, was assassinated in 1924, the British issued humiliating demands. The Wafd government resigned, and British troops reasserted their presence in Cairo. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Egypt was caught in a political triangle between the British, the Wafd Party, and the monarchy, particularly under King Fuad I and later King Farouk. Although the Wafd remained a dominant nationalist force, its repeated sidelining by royal and colonial powers eroded its credibility. A political culture of clientelism, repression, and elite rivalry took root, frustrating the goals of genuine independence and popular representation. Meanwhile, the social inequalities and economic underdevelopment that had helped ignite the 1919 revolution remained largely unaddressed. Land ownership was still heavily concentrated in the hands of small elite, and British economic interests dominated key sectors, such as cotton and infrastructure. The failure of parliamentary politics to deliver meaningful reforms bred disillusionment among workers, peasants, and young military officers. This sense of betrayal and stagnation ultimately paved the way for the Egyptian Revolution of 1952, led by the Free Officers Movement under Gamal Abdel Nasser. The 1952 revolution was in many ways a reaction to the unfulfilled promises of 1919. While the earlier revolution had emphasized liberal nationalism and constitutional reform, the Free Officers embodied a more radical anti-colonial and social reformist agenda. They sought not only to end foreign domination, but to overturn the entrenched systems of class privilege and political corruption that had plagued the monarchy and the old political parties. As Nasser later reflected, the 1919 generation fought valiantly, but they were not able to achieve true liberation because they compromised with colonialism. In this view, the 1952 revolution was not a repudiation of 1919, but its continuation by other means. A second, more uncompromising phase in Egypt's struggle for genuine independence and social justice.